Professor Zhang, it's great to have you on the show.
Good to be here, thank you.
Well, what is the current political situation in Afghanistan, and why does it take a relatively longer time to form a new government?
Yeah, right now, actually the Taliban has now taken control of most part of Afghanistan 20 years after it was removed from power in the United States-led military operations. While there are still some resistance forces in some parts such as the Panjshir province in Afghanistan, but compared to the Taliban, they are in quite disadvantaged positions in terms of the number of their armed personnel and in terms of the weapons. Well, the Taliban is currently preparing to form a new government, but what the new government will look like remains to be seen. And the composition of the new government will be announced shortly. Overall, I think that the Taliban faces two difficulties. First, while the Taliban has pledged that this time it is going to rule differently, but the question is that to what extent it is going to rule differently. So, for instance, it claims that it is going to respect human rights and women's rights. However, according to some sources, the Taliban has already decided not to include any women in its new cabinet. And also, for instance, today the Taliban requires women to wear the hijab and niqab in public. It remains to be seen to what extent the new government under the Taliban's rule will follow the fundamentalist ideology and implement the Sharia. And second, the Taliban has pledged that the new government will be an inclusive one, and it is now trying to accommodate different political and ethnic stakeholders. But on the other hand, the Taliban also hopes that its own members can dominate the new cabinet. So it remains to be seen like how it is going to allocate the political power.
But can we understand that as they want to consolidate their own power first, but hopefully they'll make the changes later on? So what do you think are the top priorities, like the problems they want to resolve at the first stage in terms of economics and political breakdowns or say challenges in the country?
Yeah, that is a very important question. Actually, the country is now plagued by a lot of uncertainties. For instance, we know that Afghanistan is one of the world's poorest countries, and today the economy is still fragile, and it is heavily dependent on foreign aid. And also the private sector there is kind of like narrow, and also the country there are a lot of illicit economy in the country. For instance, the drug production is kind of like an important driver of Afghanistan's economy. So for the Taliban, it faces the challenge of managing a fragile economy. And what is worse, as many European countries, the United States, the World Bank, for instance, they have all indicated their intention to reduce the financial aid to Afghanistan under the Taliban's rule. And this means that the country is very likely to face a deterioration in economic conditions. And moreover, the security situation in Afghanistan is also worrisome. On the one hand, due to the weakness of the Afghan security force, the Taliban found it easy to seize many cities and districts in the past days. But holding on to the major cities and the rural areas is another story, because there are still many militia leaders, and there are also the tribal leaders, and their relations with the Taliban are quite tricky. And this means that the country is still susceptible to chaos and unrest. While on the other hand, the country also faces serious terrorist threat. And we have to remember that Afghanistan used to be kind of like a center of the global terrorism, and there are multiple violent groups operating in the country right now, such as ISIS-K, such as Al-Qaeda. And the recent terrorist attacks in Kabul airport indicates that the ISIS-K is a growing threat. Well, yes, indeed, the Taliban says that it is in conflict with the ISIS-K, and there is no doubt that the Taliban is going to strengthen its efforts in counterterrorism. But this will not be an easy task.
the withdrawal of the US troops from Afghanistan has been completed by August 31st. And then China says that shows a new opening of its country's history. So what is the international reaction to that situation?
Yeah, actually, the Taliban's swift takeover in the past days has placed both the European Union and the United States in a very awkward position. For the United States, for instance, the Taliban's swift return means that the United States military operations in the past and 2 decades of investment of trillions of dollars in Afghanistan become meaningless right now, I would say. And as we can see, the United States has withdrawn its troops, and this means that the United States does not want to increase its diplomatic investment in Afghanistan. So it is very unlikely that the United States will overthrow the Taliban once again, and it means that it has to deal with the Taliban. And as for the European Union, things are even more difficult because the deterioration in economic conditions and the increasing political uncertainties in Afghanistan is very likely to lead to another new wave of refugee arrivals to Europe. And the European Union does not have effective countermeasures. And what is worse, it knows that the United States can be of little help in this regard. And in fact, the European Union is not satisfied at all with Biden's irresponsible withdrawal of troops. And in the future, it is very likely that the European Union is going to implement some new and a more independent foreign policy towards Afghanistan, and it has to talk to the Taliban. So right now, for both the European Union and the United States, they are trying not to give immediate recognition of the new government under the Taliban's rule, but they know that it is there, and they do not have much choice but to deal with it in the future.
Well, actually, China also said that we hope that the country would have a fresh and peaceful start for the country's further development. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, actually, as a neighbor of Afghanistan, China pays close attention to what's going on in the country. For China, I think the most important thing is to maintain stability in Afghanistan. This is because China has to protect the economic interests of Chinese companies and the safety of Chinese citizens in Afghanistan. And also China has to prevent the rise of terrorism in Afghanistan, and especially its spread to China, which may jeopardize China's own security. So right now we can see that China is trying to push for reconciliation, and also China hopes to bring peace to Afghanistan. And also there is no doubt that China will contribute to the economic reconstruction in the country in the future.
Thank you, Professor Zhang, for your insights.
Thank you.